Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Sanders, and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Uh, Today, what I want to talk about is what I call the Great Silicon Divide. And for a little over the last 20 years, a group of three watch companies uh, called themselves CSEM. It stood for the Center for the Swiss Electronic and Microtechnique. Basically, what they did, they got together and they decided to have silicon hairsprings made. Okay. They also sort of, Ulysse Nardin was sort of in there with them. Ulysse Nardin had made their own silicon hairspring. There got to be a sort of a thing over who should who should have it, and so what they would basically CSEM decided, okay, well, go ahead and we'll let you have it, but don't make a big deal about it, something like that. Okay, so anyway, I think around 2022, the patent ran out, and so now it's the opportunity for other watch companies to sort of quote jump in and get a silicon hairspring. Others had said no way. So let's take a look at what's going on now. First of all, the ones that have had silicon hairsprings for quite a long time and had them available, I'm not necessarily using them, have been Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Swatch. And under Swatch, you have Breguet, Blancpain, Glashütte Original, Jacques Droz, Omega, Longines, Rado, Union, Glashütte, Tissot, Certina, Mito, Hamilton, and Swatch. Rolex, well, Tudor's really officially under the Hans Willoff Foundation, and not Rolex, but they're sort of in the same boat together. Tudor ended up with the silicon hairsprings. Rolex is very different about that. I'll talk about that in a second. Now, on the other side are sort of the non-silicon. You have, first of all, you have these big groups like the Richemont group, and they include Allanga, Unsunda, Baum et Mercier, Cartier, IWC, Schaffhausen, Montblanc, Panerai, Piaget, Roger Dubuis, and Vacheron Constantin. Now, there's another thing that Richemont Group has called Val Fleurier, and they did make a silicon movement for Baum et Mercier. It was called, let me see what it's called, the Baumatic, or they had a version of it. And I guess there was some big trouble with the guys on the patent, and so they cut it out. But the reason I bring it up is that they have the capacity to do it. And if we're not talking about just one or two, we're talking about several major watch companies. Now, Rolex, the interesting thing that Rolex came out with, I forgot, it was 1908 or something like that, they called it, and it did have a silicon hairspring, and some of the women's watches did too. But for the most part, Rolex had made this really wonderful hairspring called the Parachrome Blue or Blue Parachrome hairspring that was not silicon. It was niobium and zirconium and some other alloys that made a very good hairspring. It didn't have problems that some of the other ones did. And so they're keeping that one so far for what I call the men's main watches, the Submariner, the Explorer, and et cetera, all of those. But anyway, so they're sort of on they have the rights to use it. They certainly have the technology and the skills, but they're back and forth right now on it. LVHM, that's another group. Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer's been doing some stuff with carbon hairsprings, and but the others really have them: Bulgari, Hublot, and Zenith. Now, the independents like Breitling, H. Moser Company, Parmigiani, Fleurier, Beauvais, Chopard, they haven't. I don't know if they plan to or not. They don't tell me. So I'm pretty sure that H. Moser isn't. One of the reasons that H. Moser isn't, they have a very successful hairspring called the Straussmann hairspring. And it's used, I think they make about 50,000 of those a year, and they're making only like 2 or 3,000 watches. So it becomes an important part. Parmigiani Fleurier is a little different because they're owned by the Sandoz Family Foundation, and they have a vertical hierarchy. And there's a company called Autocalpa that makes their hairsprings and some other parts. And I don't know whether they will have that as an option or not. We'll see. Beauvais has a sort of a making company called Demier, and they have their hairspring. Chopard, I'm not sure what about Chopard that is, just one of the independents. Now, the AHCI, these are the independent watchmakers, F.P. Jorn, Caribou and Lannon, Vianney Halter, all of the really great names in watchmaking, and not only Swiss, but internationally. Marco Lang from Germany, Cyrus Sissel. There's another guy whose stuff I really like from France. There are people from all over the world. I think Ming from Singapore, I believe. Anyway, so you have all of these great people and the independents. Now, I asked some independents who were like Caribou and Lannis, do you ever plan on using silicone hairsprings? He said, no way. Now, another aspect of this is the Geneva seal. For years, most of the Geneva seals went to Patek Philippe, but when they started using their silicone hairsprings in 2009, Geneva seal said that, doesn't meet our standards, and so we're not going to give it to you anymore. They didn't, and so Patek Philippe made their own. It's another story. So let's take a look at about some of the issues in this Great Divide and what's going on about it and how it affects us as watch collectors. Now, the first thing I want to do is answer the question of why silicone hairsprings. First of all, there's what is called a thermocompensation. Basically, they're able to perform efficiently through oxidation. I don't know how they do it, but it's like you have the heat and cold, and the one thing that silicone hairsprings can do, they can resist that. Now they also are resistant to magnetism. I've had some watches that get messed up by magnetizing, and it's just a problem to all mechanical watches. And so the hairspring and balance app, they're affected by magnetism using ferromagnetic materials. In other words, the transitional metals that are used instead of the metalloids that like silicon. By the way, too, see Rolex has both the silicon and the parachrome. So they're sort of balanced on that one. There's a thing, they come out of the silicon wafers. They come out in these sheets and they can get them, and they're very different than your traditional hairsprings. Now, the big thing about it is that, again, answering the question of why has to do with chronometry. Okay, now there's something that's called deep reactive ion etching, or DRIE. And what it can do, basically, it can do etchings on the side of a hairspring, which is like, wow, how do they do that? And so if you have different thicknesses at different points on a hairspring, you can optimize the isochronocism, in other words, the accuracy and the constant accuracy. And there's no need to up the terminal curve on the thing. Now, once the optimal geometry is determined, accurate parts can be produced by the Julians. Okay, so it's sort of like it's no small feat, one, to make silicon hairsprings, and second of all, to get them just the way you want them. Now, this, at some point, there's a computer who does all of that that goes into a machine. This is not somebody there with, let's take a look at this. This is the tolerances that they're dealing with. A millimeter is, you get an idea what a millimeter looks like real quick. Here, let me pull out my handy ruler right here. These are millimeters, even smaller. These little marks between each other, each one of those is a millimeter. Now they work with microns, which is 1/1000th of a millimeter. Okay, so you're dealing with a very small unit with a micron, and so the diagram there is that you get precise oscillation with this by these etching, and I don't know exactly why or how, but they do it. And they do it to these tolerances, and then once they get it, they can make as many of them as they want. It's not a matter of every time you got to go out and try to get it just right. These things, once you get it, you can produce them en masse. Now, the good thing about it is you have uniformity. Okay, here's, I saw this Patek Philippe 5212A, one of my favorite Patek Philippe. I really like the dial on that. And it's $38,650. That's why I don't have one, or even several. So both watches have the silicon hairspring, the Patek Philippe 5212A and the Tissot Sideral S Powermatic 80. And so they have equal performance, which is really a very cool thing, especially if you can't afford a Patek Philippe. And there's something that I like about that a lot. So you can get a really inexpensive watch or a really expensive watch, and they have equal performance. The Powermatic 80 is the interesting thing about it, is that what they did with it, they tuned it down to 3 hertz from 4, and this was they did it, I think, so that they could lengthen the power reserve on it. But that's different levels, and so the very best one was the one with a silicon in it, which I thought was very interesting. Uniformity has a lot of advantages. I mean, for production-wise, you don't have to keep everything is not new every time. You have a cross-mechanism interchangeability of things. You have lower cost and better performance. I mean, it's got everything you'd want, and so that's one of the very, very good things about silicon hairsprings. Now, turning to hairsprings made with transitional metals, you have a lot of variety that's done. Down in the lower left, there is a Rolex Submariner with a parachrome hairspring, a blue parachrome hairspring. And the big advantage of the non-silicon hairsprings, they can be adjusted. You can't adjust a silicon hairspring. They usually don't need it. I don't know under what circumstance they'd have to be adjusted, but if you try to, they'd break because they're relatively brittle. But not with these watches. And so you end up with a lot of interesting things, but there aren't that many companies who make their own hairsprings. The ones that I'm showing here, they all do. Up at the top, you have Parmigiani. Top left is you have a hairspring by a company called Autocalpa hairspring. Parmigiani, I thought they made their own. Well, they do and they don't. On the one hand, this the Sandoz Family Foundation has a vertical ownership of different elements. They own the Parmigiani watches, they own the Vaucher uh, movements, and then they also own, among other things, Autoculpa, which makes hairsprays. And so that's why they have an Autoculpa hairspray. Um, in the middle is a H. Moser Streamliner Perpetual Calendar with a Strawman hairspring. Now, the important thing about a Strawman hairspring, this came out of one of the ones that's part of H. Moser, are owned by the same people, called Precision Engineering. And I believe when the Milan family bought it, they included both Precision Engineering as well as H. Moser. And this hairspring is really an excellent one. And the Strawman hairspring is favored by some of the best watchmakers, Carry and Lawton, VMF. They're really excellent hairsprings, and of course they're in H. Moser watches. Now, another company that makes its own hairsprings is Bova 1822, and I say that because they're relatively new. They there was a Beauvais, the original Beauvais, and then Pascal Raffi bought the rights to the name and really built it up into this wonderful watch company called Beauvais. And the Beauvais 1822, Monsieur Beauvais. Now, the hairspring is by Demier, and Demier is basically a movement company that includes doing a hairspring for Beauvais. Beauvais bought all of these little companies that did the mechanics of everything and called them Demier. Now, another interesting thing about, well, I'll call them traditional hairsprings, is they have a regulator or an adjuster, something that will adjust the springs, because you can adjust the spring. Well, what'll happen if you tighten up the spring a little, it'll go faster, and if you loosen it up a little, it'll go slower. And so you can put it into a regulator. This is one thing I enjoy doing. This watch was regulated to 1 second per day. This is something I made from, I got a movement that is a clone of a 6498 from China. I think it was $20 or so, and I regulated that doggone thing to 1 second, 1 second a day. And so, I mean, that was the fun part about it. Now, I'm sure that in time, this will need regulating some more after wear and tear, because I'm giving it to one of my grandsons. but I can do it. I mean, it's not that hard. I can just take also to you an excuse to go see him, or have him come here and let's go regulate your watch. Now, one of the I just recently got a Maurice Grossman watch, and I saw this. The index adjuster has a screw, and then on the screw is attached to the tip of the regulator. And so by turning it one way, the screw moves it this way or that way very fine. So that's one of the things that I found really interesting. There's something called a swan neck regulator. It's one of the prettiest regulators around for doing adjustments. And here's one on an RGM watch. And it just sort of swirls around along with the engraving on this RGM watch. Now, another one is by Moulay Glashuda. They call it the woodpecker, and it's something like the swan neck. You have a sort of a spring that's against the regulator arm, and then you have a screw going the other way. And so no matter which way you push it, I mean, you turn it one way, the spring will push it to the right, and if you screw it in, it'll push it to the left, and you get very fine regulation with that. Now, the final one is an Agon pit regulator by Agonor. This is by Jean-Marc Viderec, and this is on a Lyrique watch, the Lyrique Etude number 1. And what you have is that you have a plate, and you loosen the screws, the two top, and then you move it one way or the other to adjust it. It makes it very easy. And then you loosen the bottom screws and turn it one way or the other for the beat. So, I mean, again, these are different kinds of ways to make adjustments. Now, according to the silicon people, you don't need that. Yeah, I mean, once you get it set up, it's perfect, and you can make a billion of them, and they're all the same. And that's true, probably, as far as I know. But with these, you have a lot of different creativity going on here, a lot of different styles. Anyway, so this, I don't know, there may be like two paths. It seems they're about a point now where they may diverge. Who knows? But it's something I think watch collectors might be interested in. I'd really like to hear what you think. And until next time, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Side, the art and science of watch collection.